My name is Brock, and this is the Dungeon Master's Toolkit Podcast. Welcome, everyone. On today's episode, I talk to Tanya for the second time. We talk about multiple different indie and narrative games and some of the mechanics and things that you can steal from those games and bring over to your preferred systems. We also talk about asking questions and giving your players narrative control. I think there's a lot of good little notes there for DMs that maybe want to reduce some of the prep and get more buy-in from their players. Tanya also has a Kickstarter going right now that will be ending today called Lo, Thy Dread Empire. It is a narrative war game and tactical role-playing game. So go ahead and check that out before the Kickstarter is over. If you're interested in helping out the show, don't forget to like, comment, and share the episodes. Contact me if you or a DM you know would like to be on the show. Use any of the affiliate links in the show notes, or support me over on Patreon or buy me a coffee. And with that, let's jump into the episode. Welcome, everybody. Today I have Tanya with me for the second time. Welcome, Tanya.
Hi, Brock. Thank you for having me back.
Yes, it's great to have you. This time, I think we're going to start out our conversation. And for anybody who's listening, if you want to go hear about Tanya, you can check out episode 1. But today we're going to start off talking about narrative game. What would you like to say about narrative?
Well, there's a big world of sort of different styles of gaming out there, different table cultures and different sort of games presenting their mechanics and their systems differently. So you've got I guess, what were we talking about? It helps to know what the sort of baseline is, and trad games are your sort of traditional sort of D&D style game where you have a GM who's in charge of the world and all the NPCs and everything, and you've got players who have sole domain over saying what their character is doing, and then there's some sort of mechanism, usually rolling dice, that the players can use to determine if they succeed or fail at different tasks, and they've got stats on their sheet. The sort of mainstream idea of what a role-play game is, at least traditionally. At different points in time, there have been different sort of names for sort of narrativist-focused games, or some folks call them story games. Indie games, they get called broadly, even though there's indie games from all different types. So I guess what I end up playing myself more are these sort of story or narrative focused systems where they look at basically they take some of those core ideas that you see in trad games and decide to go against the grain, with an eye towards refocusing on mechanics or table culture or systems of play which are looking at the story and the narrative and the sort of narrative flow and the sort of feelings that you're feeling as a player and that are being invoked by the story of the characters that you're playing. So I go for more of that sort of game, and I think while some people haven't maybe played those or have not had much experience with them, I think there's a lot of tools that can come out from that sort of style of game that apply as much to trad games or your sort of old school Renaissance, your OSR games, or your Free Kriegspiel Renaissance, your FKR games. These other styles of game that are out there can actually look at the sort of story gaming sphere and pillage a lot of the good ideas from it for themselves. So I think maybe that'd be something I'd like to talk about, because that's what I do when I'm running games.
Yeah, I think that all falls in line with what we'd like to talk about on podcasts. Before we jump into some specific mechanics and stuff, what are some recent narrative games that you've played?
Okay, recently I played a game called The Soul Survivor, which is based on Chinese mythology about the time when there were 10 suns in the sky and they were shot down from the sky and 9 of them died. And the last remaining sun had to make its way back up to the heavens to sort of light up the world and to restore some balance to the world. And so it was an interesting game where we basically took turns either as the main protagonist of the sun trying to reach heaven, an antagonist on the journey, or someone that could be a potential companion or collaborator for that scene, or going beyond for the rest of the game. And so I think it's quite an interesting one, because I guess the sort of one of the things to take out of this was the roles weren't fixed. So we were able to rotate roles, and by doing so, it meant that everybody had their own take and their own spin on both the central character and the antagonists and other sort of NPCs. And I guess you could take this into all sorts of other games. You could use this in let's just pick up D&D as the sort of like the main game, or the most played game out there. You could have it so that the DM's role could rotate through the party for even just for a one-off or for a short time, where people take control of each other's characters for a time, or have some sort of troop play where you've got multiple characters each, and for different types of mission you pick a different character, and play sort of someone different each time according to the sort of situation that's occurring. So been playing we played Soul Survivor. What else have I played recently? Oh, we played what's it called? Is it Yegzeba's Bed and Breakfast? It's by Jay Dragon, who recently released Wander Home. And it's sort of like the next game. It's a playtest document that's out there at the moment, and it's sort of like I don't know. The best way to describe it is a sort of it's like a legacy game, almost like legacy board games that you get, like Pandemic Legacy. So as you play, there's a fixed cast of characters, and changes occur to them. And so you mark those changes on the characters for the next time you come back and play it. And I believe in the final version, you'll be able to actually add stickers and make changes and write things in the actual book, so that even if a whole new group were to come and play it again, they would still be the legacy of what had happened in previous stories. And so it has that aspect to it. It also has an aspect of, there's lots of different fixed types of scene or chapter that occur. And so each time you play, you pick a new chapter, and it's almost got its own mini game mechanics and its own sort of flow. So that way, the way in which the mechanics are set up, and the way in which it sort of is framed and posited, and the way the mechanics are engaged, invoke different emotional responses. They help draw the magic circle along with the play group. So the weight for the motion isn't being hindered by the rules. The weight for the emotional feel of the scene is being given momentum by those rules. And I guess that's something, again, you could take into other games. You say that you wanted to do like you're playing D&D, but doing a chase scene with minis on a board isn't going to be that interesting a lot of the time. It's going to be a lot of like moving behind, trying to hit, run, trying to hit, and trying to make something happen with mechanics that are ill suited to that. It could work, but maybe the lesson is that maybe you could look towards something else that could provide a sort of almost a mini game. Like there's a game out there called Cut to the Chase, which, well, it's its own set of rules for running chase scenes. I've used it to just drop it into other game systems and into trad games to give a sort of interesting sort of cutaway, so it feels different to the regular flow of gameplay. So that's maybe a lesson I could take from that. Yeah, and that's the couple I've played most recently. Played a little Fiasco, and or at least we tried to. I bought a new box set recently, just before lockdown. Actually, I say recently, but time's gone all wibbly the past few years. It was right before the first lockdown, and I keep bringing it along to my local club and putting it down. And we do a sort of one shot sessions twice a month, and so we keep pitching different games for that. And every time we're just about to play Fiasco, something else comes up that we end up playing instead. So if Jason Morningstar, the writer of Fiasco's out there, we're very sorry, but we did get a game of Skeletons in, which is one of his other games. So
Yeah,
uh,
there's a lot of indie games out there to choose from. So only doing 2 a month, I'm sure it would take a while to get to everything.
yeah. Well, we're well, as well as basically we do two sort of evenings of pickup games. So either in the lead up to the night and then on the evening for about half an hour, people pitch any games they brought along that they'd like to facilitate or run, and then we basically just gravitate towards the games that take our fancy, and if there's any conflicts or a game's too full or not got enough people, we work out what we're doing, and then after half an hour just start playing till the end of the evening, which is a lot of fun. It's great. It's really lovely to have a space that's dedicated to small press and indie games, because I get to play just such a wide variety of different styles of game and just try out like just ideas that I'd never have came across before. But along with that, we also arrange our own sort of like ongoing and longer form games that take place on at different times to those arranged club meets. So I've been running A State, which is a sort of like local legend, because A State came out. There was a first edition way back in the early 2000s, and then it kind of disappeared, and nobody thought the setting was really good, but the system didn't quite click, and nobody thought it would ever come back. And it's just on pre-order at the moment through Handiwork Games, who are just down the road in Falkirk, and it's amazing. It's going to be a really beautiful big book with like gorgeous art, and the systems are forged in the dark. Sort of game, so it takes its sort of cues from Blades in the Dark by John Harper, and I've been running that as a sort of fortnightly game for the past few months, and absolutely loving it. It's got like Blades in the Dark, and it's but especially A State, I think, is an evolution from that. Has got a lot for I think crad gamers to really get their teeth into in a way that they will enjoy, but also in a way that will give them loads of new tools for gaming in the future.
I'm gonna have to check that one out because I really like the Forged in the Dark mechanics,
Mm,
and the dice resolution, and Blades is a lot of fun as well. So I would
mm.
like to try more games using that.
Yeah, I well, the things that I'd take from A State in particular. Obviously, they've done small changes, like it's a different set of attribute stats. So in sort of Forged in the Dark games and in Blades in the Dark, there's these sort of attributes that are more like your modus operandi about how you're going about things. So you try and sort of say what you're doing in terms of the fiction, and at the same time have a conversation about which of your stats seems to fit for the way in which you're acting. So instead of just you can't just sort of hit the button on your top stat every time, because a lot of the times in the fiction it just won't make sense to do that. And so having those conversations and sort of appreciating that fictional positioning. There's also a really nifty little chart that they've put in to help with the understanding on how to basically have a conversation about how risky something is and how much reward there is involved if it's sort of a desperate act or a sort of quite controlled act, just like in Blades in the Dark. But I think the way in which they've visualized that and made it a very visual part of the game has been a real leap forward, and I expect a lot of other Forged in the Dark games will start using something similar very soon. But the idea of just playing that, like you said, you'd played Blades in the Dark yourself there, Brock, yeah?
Yeah,
Yeah. So the ideas from that, I find are the important thing, because it breaks down, and once you've sort of grokked, you've got a handle on what's happening with that you've got this sort of like fictional position, this sort of idea of like how risky something is, how much reward there is, and what that should mean in terms of mechanics, and that's informed by your sort of fiction, your discussion at the table about the fiction and what's happening and what the character is doing. And then that feeds into the mechanical aspect. And then the mechanical aspect immediately feeds straight back into the fiction again. And so you have these narrative outcomes. So rather than sort of saying, "Oh, I'm going to hit," I pick up these dice, I roll my strength plus my weapon bonus, and then we work out some abstract, like that's abstract to begin with, and then we work out a sort of what does that. The GM tells me what that means, which is a sort of fictive position, but then we have to go straight back into the abstract because we start tallying hit points, or we're working out effects and we're putting templates down and all this sort of stuff. And that's got its own sort of fun and joy in it. Don't get me wrong, like I love narrative war games and skirmish games, and they're all about that. So, but the idea that you can have these sort of mechanisms where you've got fiction going in, it's almost like firing a sort of metal ball bearing at a high powered magnet, and it's gonna cause it to go off in a weird direction, and you don't know quite yet when you throw it what's going to happen, but you've got some idea, and then you pick up your dice, you roll it, and then it changes the whole fictive direction, and then you're immediately running with that. I feel like that helps make the world seem more. It gives it a bit more sort of a bit more. What's the word? My COVID addled brain isn't thinking straight at the moment. There's a word for it when you've got when the fiction seems more real, when it seems more
Like immersive?
yeah, kind of immersive. There's another word for it, but it doesn't matter. I could faff on that all night. But I think that yeah, it makes it more immersive, or more just gives it a sense of like you can believe in the fiction sort of thing.
I think
Gives
that
it.
from
You.
I think that from playing Blades versus like D&D, kind of like you mentioned with switching between like the narrative and the abstract. In D&D, it's kind of you're doing something and then you roll and then it's either a yes or no and then you kind of get the result from Dungeon Master. Whereas with like Forged in the Dark or PBTA games, well,
Yeah.
I feel like the action that you're taking and the roles that you're making feel a little bit more fluid. Like going from describing what you're doing to a role to then consequences and then describing what you're doing again seems a little bit more natural and more smooth than it does in a D&D to me.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, and I find that you could take a lot of those ideas and you can kind of retrofit them onto trad games quite easily. The way in which you shape the conversation at the table can change based on your experiences with different types of game, and so I guess yeah, that there's another sort of one of the sort of interesting parts of A State is sort of like the way in which it refocuses from like Blades in the Dark, you're doing these heists, to A State, you're playing people in this vast sort of sci-fi city, and they're just trying to look out for their little corner of the city and make it better, make life better there in some way. And so they've refocused it on hope and understanding that area by getting you to answer questions early on about that area, and really sort of bringing out some the character of the sort of the location right away. And that's definitely something that I've done beforehand with lots of other games going back. Like I've been doing that for about 20 years at least, of sort of like asking players questions to fill in the blanks about the game, because like a lot of GMs feel like the whole weight of the world is on their shoulders. Like the game world is on their shoulders because that's what the game tells you. The players have got their own player domain, and you're the GM, and you come up with everything else. And so there's a heavy duty of sort of like knowing things, coming up with things, plotting, planning, having things right in advance. And I sometimes feel like that type of planning can have a sort of negative impact in the long term on the GM, the amount of work they've got to do, on the type of fun that they can have, and if they get it wrong, like if they do something the players just aren't vibing with, like it can cause more of a hiccup. Whereas you can share some of that load just by having the GM ask questions at key moments to help either expand the world or or to get more depth about what's happening, what about the emotional depth of the characters in the play, the sort of play involved at the time. So I guess an example of that could be if you had, like, you've got these players, they've had these characters with and they've had this. I'm trying to think of an actual example here. So they've basically had things going badly in their neighborhood, and they've been trying to fix stuff, but there seems to be this escalating uh, gang war between different criminal elements, and sort of like they're trying to calm it down. And you can turn to a cat like player, instead of just asking like what do you do, the usual sort of thing. You can ask them like, how's your character feeling about this circumstance, or you can ask them even more like sort of acute questions like, how do they feel about this other NPC or this other character, so that you can start to explore their inner landscape and plumb some more emotional depth. And you can also ask them to add details. Like I had them, they went to a sort of arcade. I said, so what happened the last time you were here at this arcade? And I let one of the characters give a little bit of a sort of spiel about it, and in doing so, they added like a couple of the landmarks that were there, and I added one of my own based on that, like a sort of like a gyroscopic flight simulator thing, and we were all sort of chipping in little ideas, and it helped generate the plot and keep things moving over. And so yeah, asking questions and asking questions that help build depth. I think a lot of Powered by the Apocalypse games, especially the sort of first wave of them, had a lot of this sort of asking questions built into the mechanics. Like when you roll, if you get 10 up, ask two questions from this list type thing. And that just taking that into other games, but not having to have rolls or anything else, just having that sort of curiosity to wonder what the characters are thinking and feeling, or that curiosity to ask a player what they think a place looks like, or what they think happened in this place, or what an NPC is kind of like. Those things can mean that you get a more collaborative group effort going. And yeah, and often that just leads to really good depth to the gameplay. It allows you to get to some really interesting, emotional, connected places. Even in sort of like high octane action games or what have you, you can really like connect into the characters and the action really quickly.
I think that this is something that I've started to do more, and it definitely takes some of the load off of you as a dungeon master. And you kind of have different varying levels that you go. Right, like you could just you could give somebody a piece of information and say, how does your character know that? Right, so it's a pretty small piece of information for them to come up with, and it probably won't really like alter any of the story that you've done. But you could also ask much more not advanced questions, but much more I don't know the right word for it, but you could say like, maybe there's an NPC in a town that you want your players to encounter, and they're going to be important to the story. You could, say to one of your players, you have a relative or somebody that lives here. Who are they? Why do they live here?
Yeah.
And then you can have this vague idea of, I need this thing to exist for the story, but I don't really care who it is. So I'm going to have the players come up with the answer to that.
Yeah. You could even take it into a sort of meta narrative level depending on your play group. So you could ask them big sort of meta questions about the setting. Like you could even have like them create your big bad from whole cloth, or I've had a play group basically know that they're going to explore a dungeon, and rather than me plot out and plan a dungeon, literally the sort of first segment of gameplay was them going into libraries and doing the sort of like research of this dungeon, but not by making a roll and then I hand them clues. It was literally like, okay, so you go in and you say that you've found like an old partial map of the place. Okay, could you draw that for me? And then having the players draw that, and then someone else saying, well, I'm going to get rumors in the marketplace, and it's like, okay, maybe we do a little bit of role play and what have you, but at the end of the day, it's like, what rumors do you hear? And I as GM, obviously as NPCs, I can throw in some more rumors of my own, and other players can be invited to play in that scene and start creating rumors, and so we get this sort of like conglomerate list of rumors, and then after about maybe an hour or two of gaming in this sort of fashion, I've got from absolutely nothing. I can sit down and we've got like the beginnings of a map of a dungeon, a bunch of like rumors about what's going on with it, like all that I knew is that like there's a dungeon there. It's meant to have some treasure, and it's like dangerous, and people don't go near it. And that's all I started with. And at the end of it, you've got this sort of like people have put in the bits of games and ideas that interest them. So when we get to going into the dungeon, I've kind of got this buy-in collectively from the group. I don't have to worry so much that have I made sure that I've put in the bits that they like, because they've had ample opportunity to ensure that there's some say that like Jill loves goblins in games and thinks they're really funky. And when we done the rumors bit, she was able to sort of talk about, oh, there's rumors that there's like a warren of goblins in there, that kind of thing. We can add that in to the sort of the play style without me having to hope that I'm getting it right.
I hadn't considered about having them draw an actual map of a place.
Mm.
And I think so you mentioned rumors, for dungeon masters who are unsure or nervous about giving your players narrative control,
Mm.
because I think that's a big holdup for a lot of people,
Yeah.
especially when you come from like a D&D background.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
it can be really hard for them to say, like, I don't want to give up control because I don't want to mess up like the world or something.
Mm.
But if you just have them give you rumors about things, then you can decide how true it is. It might be, 100% true, or it might be
Yeah.
partially true, or it could be completely false. And even with like the map idea, you could say, okay, you found this map to this dungeon, the players draw it out, and you could have it be almost entirely like that, but say, oh, there's like this actually there's
Yeah.
part of this is caved in, or there's a hidden
Bingo.
area over here, and it's a completely different area.
That's 100% it. Yeah, that's exactly how I played it. Like, or there's the map's incomplete, or it's out of date, or something's gone wrong, all that kind of thing. But on your point, the idea that there can be a bit of a nervousness about, is this going to work out if we cede a bit of the sort of narrative authority. But I think I think first up, being open with the table and talking about it and saying, let's give this a go, always helps. And I kind of feel like there's, like, once you've given it a shot, most people that give it a go, I think, find that they have a good experience with it. I read an interesting thing. I can't remember who's writing this explicitly. It's been going about from a few different sources, but there's like social layers. There's 3 layers of social interaction happening when you're playing any role play game. Okay, so there's you're just regular interpersonal people at a table there. Okay, so there's you, and there's some pals or some people that have sat down at a table at a con, or some people who have turned up at a club, or however you know each other or don't know each other. You've got that layer of the sort of rules of social interaction, okay, which are like saying hello, smiling at people or not, or like just chatting away with one another, and that's sort of one layer that's occurring at any games table. Okay, even when we're playing online, the sort of like the social interaction layer occurs, and then along with that, you've got the sort of games mechanics, and so you've got like a set of rules that people are sort of nominally agreeing through by at the social layer, that they're going to play using these mechanics of gameplay. So we agree that we're going to roll 20-sided dice and roll to hit, or that we agree that this game has got sort of like a bidding mechanic, and that we bid when there's a conflict or something. And that we're going to use either a rule book with some sort of rules that we kind of all agree on, and or we're going to have some sort of facilitator or dungeon master or games master who's going to act as an authority or have like narrative authority on that. And like I've said, there's other games where you can actually spread that narrative authority about, or you can agree on different ways of dividing up that responsibility. But that all occurs on a sort of mechanical layer. And then you've got sort of like a fictive layer along with that. And all three of these are interacting. So the fiction layer is sort of like the narrative, and you're sort of like thinking about the characters and the flow of the story, and the sort of getting feedback on the emotions from that, and the sort of way in which you're sort of thinking. So these sort of three different layers of gameplay are all happening at the same time and all interacting. And so a lot of a lot of problems and a lot of nervousness and a lot of worry, say you think that you're going to cede, maybe you're thinking about ceding narrative control in some respect, like doing that dungeon thing, but you're worried it's going to be misused or not understood. Just taking things back to that social layer of just being people at a table talking to one another, and sort of explaining where you're coming from. And if a problem does occur, maybe dropping things down to that level, or across to that level, is a good way of handling things. It's the old adage of there's problems at the games table. Well, maybe we should talk about them.
Yeah, that's cool. I haven't really heard of a breakdown of the different layers of, basically a gaming table.
Mm.
So it's interesting to hear those all spread out, but they all make a ton of sense.
Yeah, and I guess this sort of keys into there's a lot of nervousness as well from some groups when a lot of games these days have sort of published, either they call them safety mechanics or safety tools, or sort of like that kind of thing comes up because some people get a little bit cagey, because I think there's two things going on. I think there's a little bit of apprehension of sort of like, is this trying to use the rules of the game to constrict to talk about the social layer? And I think in some ways it is, but not in a sort of worrisome way. It's basically helping you. I like to think of it like drawing the magic circle around the table. So if you've got like a bit in your rule book and it says, "Hey, before you start play, maybe it's a good idea to." What we'll do is we'll all agree that if a topic comes up that either bores the hell out of someone or makes someone really, it takes them away from the game and makes it feel uncomfortable, that there's a sort of card with an X on it in the center, and if anyone taps it, we'll all just agree to pause and just take a moment to breathe and maybe rewind the narrative a little bit and have just enough conversation to figure out what we need to do to make this a more fun experience for everyone, and then restart play from there. And I think having that in your game text or having similar things, they don't prevent problems happening, and I don't think they claim they will. But what they do is they get everybody to talk or to understand a certain way in which we're going to try and behave to one another, and to bring that, even if it's meant to be like it could be an unspoken thing normally, and 99% of the time things are okay. But like I used to run LARPs and had no idea that there's a particular piece of music that really, I don't know why it would do this, but my flatmate who I was gaming with at the time really couldn't be around that bit of music. And so by like using these sort of safety mechanics, and then finding that out, and then knowing how to sort of not use that within the sort of soundtrack going on in the background of this game, it was really a good bit of information to make the whole experience better for everyone, and it avoided a lot of sort of messiness. But like I say, it doesn't have to be for things that are traumatic either. At the local games club, a few of us have a line, a sort of like bar from appearing in the game, like content we don't want against Cthulhu, because we're fed up of our past experiences of people playing games that are meant to be sort of small town America, where like there's meant to be some sort of like heist or some sort of hijinks, and then all of a sudden we're playing in the middle of a game of Call of Cthulhu. And we just so we've just got a line against Cthulhu mythos like that comes up as a sort of standard in a lot of games at the moment. And it's just because we're just not into that content. And if we're playing something that's meant to be cosmic horror, then maybe that line won't get used. But you know, it's there to help set the tone for the table. And I don't know, have you heard of a cat's sheet at all before?
No, I haven't.
Oh, grand. Hopefully you'll be able to link it one on your show notes, but it's sort of like a sheet, or it doesn't have to be formally written. You can just have this as a conversation that you have with as a group before you start a game. But CATS is an acronym, and it's for the C's for concept. So that's the sort of like the overall concept of the game you're going to be playing. The A is for aim of the game. The T is for tone. So sort of you're going for like a light-hearted comedy, serious sort of gritty tone, or you're going for something that's sort of like melodramatic. Like what are you going for? And the final option is the subject matter. So what sort of subject matter is going to come up in this game? I think just having that conversation at the start or at any point where it feels like it'd be good to talk about where the game's going can help keep everyone on the same sort of page. Because if you say, oh, the tone is meant to be, say that you've got a game that it's meant to be quite black, like or sort of dark gallows humor. And you've got this, you say that's going to be the tone, and that we hope that in character we're going to try and play everything sort of as if it were real. But when things are funny, what we're going to do is we're not going to laugh out loud in character or be silly or kooky in character. We're going to try and hold with the tone. And if, say, someone just can't hold it together, you can make the agreement, well, what we'll do is we'll take a 2-minute table break. We'll just break things down, grab some juice, stretch our legs, that sort of thing. It means that by having those conversations, you can make your whole play experience like better. It allows you to go, like I've played with people for the first time and managed to go into some really deep emotional role play experiences, the kind of stuff that I'd normally in the past expected to do when I'd been gaming with a group for a few years. We've done this on our first time gaming together because we were able to talk about which content we would like to leave off the table, or which content we'd like to fade into the background and not focus on, and which content we're actually really interested in, and what sort of tone and concepts we're really wanting to steer towards. It meant that we could jump straight in with that knowledge and go into a lot more depth right away without fear that we'd be stepping on someone's toes because I didn't know where their comfort zones were.
Yeah, that makes sense. I've seen documents or like campaign pitches almost that kind of have some of this, but not necessarily laid out in this kind of this concisely.
Yeah.
And then we've also done one of the campaigns that I'm in. We did kind of do a lines and veils thing where we talked about here's where we draw the line. We're not going to talk about this or show it on camera, or we're not going to. Here are other things that they might get mentioned, but it won't be like we won't play it out at the table, sort of a deal either. So I think that all kind of is all kind of similar to what you said, just not set up quite as straightforward, maybe as.
Yeah, I think that a lot of sort of like your sort of indie game and story game sort of spheres have been using these sort of tools now for a long time as standard. Like we make it at Edinburgh Indie Gamers, it's a standard requirement that any game ran either a club meet or in conjunction, like organized from the club server, or sort of as part, like met through the club. Our games have to use some form of safety mechanic, and we sort of recommend maybe, if nothing else, just an X card. But it's up to the group to determine what that looks like and to all agree upon it. So it isn't a prescriptive sort of one size fits all. Because we also put out, like we've had discussions about the the fact that like sometimes these safety mechanics aren't that they're sort of like quite a crude tool sometimes that they don't have a lot always have a lot of nuance, but we all sort of agree that we'd rather have what we've got and sort of develop this as further rather than go back to what we had before of just not talking about things and then having moments where people feel sort of uncomfortable or alienated or sort of they sort of they sort of disassociate from the situations that we're in and from play. And so yeah, we've got I guess that the one other sort of main tool we've been using recently along those lines is stars and wishes. I've heard it termed like roses and thorns before, but I much prefer the sort of stars and wishes sort of set up. It's sort of like something to do after a session of play, where we go round the table and we each say one thing that really stood out as something we really loved about the session. And it could be something that happened in character. It could be a moment. It could be an out of character thing. It could be somebody's portrayal of a character. Anything akin to that. We all have a moment to mention what our star is, and then we all say something that we wish for going forward, either in the immediate next session or just overarching as we play in the future. So it could be something like, "Oh, I hope that we'll see that NPC again," or "I really hope that we don't have this sort of like a more mystery stuff going on because it didn't really click with me," or just something that you're hoping for in the next session. And I think that works well for any table because it means that the GM has this sort of like little moment where everyone can decompress and where you can hear what was working at your table and hear what they'd like to see in the future without it being a big negative thing. It isn't like people are going like, let's really like poke down on this moment and just hate on it. It's about, oh, what do we want to do in the future? What have we enjoyed doing this session? I think that's a big help. So again, this comes from sort of like this sort of culture of safety tools and sort of like almost giving people formalized tools which can help you like make that social layer of gaming at the table go smoother and faster, especially if you're gaming with people that you've never gamed with before or who you've only gamed with rarely.
I think that having some sort of a system like this set up, even if players could have done these things before, for example, the X card, in any game that you're in, even if you haven't formally talked about safety, you could just say, "Hey, this makes me feel uncomfortable," whatever. But having kind of an agreed upon system or procedure for how to do it is, I think, just
Yeah,
going to make it more likely that will use that and be okay using it when they feel to.
absolutely. And the thing is that someone might not follow it. You might have someone presses the X card and then everyone ignores it and they carry on. That can happen. Okay, it's not like you press the X card and suddenly like a bunch of like power armored marines burst through the window and stop the game. It's like just not happening. But I think you're right. I think by having that conversation, it sort of like gives a sort of clicks the fingers for everyone. It's like a light bulb moment of, oh, wait a sec, we've got to maybe think about how we're all behaving or interconnecting here. What's happened? Something's happened that we need to maybe just pause and put the brakes on a little. That's lovely. It's really nice to be looking out for one another because you want to have fun.
Yeah, I think it's definitely good that we've moved towards having more of these tools available and we're
Mhm.
finding new ways to bring those to the table.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, I guess yeah, that's kind of the main things I can think of at the moment from sort of like the sort of like the indie and story games that I've been playing. Like things that I would definitely take wholesale into other games is the sort of like the culture and the sort of like the sort of small bits of text and mechanics that are used to help weave a better circle of play they're universal. You could use those in any game, and they've definitely came. It's quite interesting. I would say that they've kind of arisen from sort of the freeform and Nordic LARP type workshopping, and also I'm pretty sure a lot of this is also came across from like consent tools and sort of traffic lighting and all sorts of things from the kink community. Sort of there's so many parallels there, and I know so many games groups are sort of like Venn diagrams of these different sort of spheres of both gaming and sort of like other parts of the world that there's a lot of overlap there.
Yeah. So since you kind of have summed everything up that we talked about, now might be a good time to jump a little lightning round, I think.
Yeah, let's do it. I love the sound of this. It's a really good wee spin you've put together.
Do you have a pair of dice with you, chance?
Oh, I do not have one to hand. Oh, wait, is it D6s?
D12s, but you could roll 2d6 and we can use that.
Okay, I've got 2D6 handy.
All right.
I didn't realize I'd need a D12, so I'd have
Nope.
to go through the house, and it's kind
That's
of
all right. We can do. I've used these tables with 2d6, and they work fine. You just skew towards different results.
hmm, hmm.
So I'll need a series of rolls, and I'll kind of ask for them one at a time, and then
Okay.
I'll tell you basically what this table does. Have you played Dungeon World at all?
Yeah, many moons ago. And in fact, I've got a dice roller on my phone, so I've just found the D12 for you. Yeah, not for a while though, so
Um,
I'll remember it.
Well, so these random tables that I'm looking at are actually a third-party supplement for Dungeon World
Oh, cool.
called Peerless Wilds, and really it's just a grouping of really nice random tables. So
Amazing.
the game doesn't actually matter.
Mm,
Basically, as we do these rolls, it's going to give us kind of a generic thing that we're looking
mm-hmm,
at,
mm-hmm.
like a feature or a creature or structure or something. And then as we
Yeah.
do more rolls, it's going to get more specific. So it might be, an arcane feature, and maybe
Mm,
it's a portal or something, right? So
yeah.
we'll kind of we'll do a bunch of rolls, we'll narrow down kind of what the thing is, and then we'll kind of come up with, what would maybe an encounter look like in this.
Mm. Okay, let's
All
do
right,
it.
so give me your first D12.
It's a 9.
9 is a structure.
Okay, let's see. 12.
12 is a ruin.
Ooh,
Mm,
excellent.
Do another roll.
Yeah, here we go. And it is if it ever stops. Oh, come on. It's a 5.
Burial or religious.
Mm.
Okay, so do we have some type of burial, religious ruin? Anything coming to mind so
Yeah,
far?
yeah, definitely. Well, I'm currently working on a game that's all about sort of undead type, undead battling, coming back to battle for the living, and so I've got this idea of it being it's an old ruined like union hall. It's like this great stone hall that's just been it was burned out by the forces of capital who decided they couldn't abide by the workers organizing and so besieged their hall, and underneath it are all these unquiet graves of former trade unionists and sort of like uh, their skeletal remains are becoming unquiet and starting to burst through the ground to fight for their rights and fight for worker liberation from beyond the grave.
So, if a party was to encounter this location, what would there be here?
Oh, I don't know. So maybe they're going out there thinking that there's these rumors of this cursed place because the overlords have sort of put in place their propaganda to say this is a cursed place and that it's got evil skeletons that are it's got an evil curse on it, and so maybe they're going out there to investigate this evil curse, and so when like a rotten hand like bursts through the soil and clenches its hand into a fist, they're going to maybe panic and think that it's a time for a fight. Only to find that maybe the people inside, or the skeletons and zombies underneath are less keen with fighting and have their own goals in mind.
Yeah, I almost, like you said, it seems more like a setup to an interesting encounter where it seems like it's going to be combat, or it's just that
Yeah,
they don't understand the full story. And once they kind of get to the bottom of all of the information, there may be some way for the players to either lift the curse or, allow these unquiet souls to kind of be at rest finally. But
yeah.
it would be more so working with the souls in the ruin than against.
Yeah, definitely. That sort of marching. Imagine the sort of shock on the players when they find themselves marching shoulder to shoulder with zombies and skeletons to go up to the Lord's Keep, and deal with the real curse. That could be an interesting twist.
It makes me think of, feel like it's kind of like Pirates of the Caribbean or something.
Or
Um,
just lots of old Celtic myth, like the unquiet dead of Celtic myth. You can sometimes just be like having a wee chat with them. It's no bother. This is Finn. He's dead. But he's an all right lad. Let's have a wee chat with him, and then we'll go sort out this problem with the curse. And apparently they've got to sort out something else and put the land to rights and stop the sourness from taking hold. And off we go.
I can definitely see something where, like you said, they go off and the king has actually done something that
Yeah.
has cursed this area or something,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. Or there's they're like they're worried about their descendants, like that they were fighting for a better way, and their descendants are living in poverty now, and they want to make sure that they're going to be all right, and that kind of thing. That kind of generational sort of ancestral thing going on can be quite interesting. Like you can do a lot with undead that isn't just like here's a bunch of like antagonists to chop up. Like it can be quite a lot of fun. And you can always bring in the sort of like the traditional horror movie aspects of it as well. But yeah, don't give up on the fact that bring folks coming back from the dead can come back for a lot of different reasons.
Yeah, I like the idea that maybe the first half of it is them just trying to. It's the classic horror at the
Hmm.
beginning where they're trying to figure out what's going on, and then it's like, oh no,
Hmm.
actually these guys are all right. They need a little help.
Yeah, and they couldn't communicate because they've not got voice boxes anymore. Like the throats are gone, so uh, eventually they managed to figure it all out. But that's quite a classic little sort of TV show. The monstrous looking thing isn't a monster after all. Sort of epic, like moral of the week on Thundercats or He-Man or what have you. Like, but yeah, I really like the wee random roll there. Thanks very much for doing that.
Yeah. And thanks, Tanya, for coming on and being on the show a second
Yeah,
time.
not quite okay. So okay if I take a moment just to plug my upcoming Kickstarter?
That would be awesome.
Yeah, so as you may have gathered, I'm doing something that's going to be using undead. It's called Lo Thy Dread Empire, and it's going to be a Zine Quest release, and it's coming out on Kickstarter on the 2nd of August. I'm going to run the campaign for about 2 weeks, and it's sort of like a half narrative war game, but with like lots of the sort of those sorts of ideas about narrative rules for story games being put into a sort of war game framing. So yeah, and it's going to be a big it's going to be a game of big sweeping battles. So it's going to be great for if you need a big battle in one of your other role play games. Just you can take this and drop it in as a subsystem that can give you the story of the battle without having to derail your whole campaign or get bogged down in trying to work out how your other systems could run a big battle for a set without still having some sort of input from the players. So yeah, look it up. I'll drop a link to you, Brock, and you can pop it out as well.
Yeah, that'll be perfect. I will include a link to that in the show notes.
Thank you.
All right. Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on and being on the show.
Oh, thank you very much again for having me. I always enjoy coming on. I love listening to your show, and so it's really nice to get to come on and have a good chat with you. Thanks very much, Brock.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Dungeon Master's Toolkit podcast. You can find links to all of the products and resources that we talked about on the show in the show notes. And if you'd like to join the community or find out how to be on the show, check out our subreddit or join us in our Discord server.